Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Tonight, we're diving into 5 true summertime horror stories, each one more disturbing than the last. These aren't ghost stories told around a campfire. They're rooted in real places, real people, and terrifyingly real experiences. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let the warm, golden season of summer rot before your very ears. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. There's a little town called Wessex just outside Belfast, Maine. It's not the kind of place you visit on purpose. Maybe you stop for gas, maybe to stretch your legs at the little general store where the soda's flat and the magazines are 5 years old. You wouldn't know it by looking, but tucked behind the tree line off County Road 43, there's a lake. Locals call it Little Pickerel. Not because there's pickerel in it. There hasn't been fish in that water for decades. Not since the drownings started. The locals don't swim there. They don't ice fish it in the winter. They don't even walk their dogs near it. Not because of some town ordinance or posted signs. It's just something everyone in Wessex knows deep down in their bones. You stay away from that water, especially when it's warm, when the air gets sticky and the mosquitoes get brave, when the lake gets restless. In the summer of 2007, a family from New Jersey came up for a week's vacation. Martin Gellner was a defense lawyer from Newark, tired and wired at the same time, living on stress, coffee, and blood pressure meds. He booked cabin 4 on Pickerel Lake, thinking it'd be a cheap, quiet getaway. He had this idea that the woods would fix whatever was broken in his family. The silence, the distance, the growing sense that he didn't really know his wife anymore or understand his kid at all. June Gellner brought her yoga mat and her beach reeds. She had a voice that was always a little too calm, like she was constantly trying to talk herself out of a panic attack. She didn't like the cabin the moment she stepped inside, said it smelled like wet socks and mothballs. The kitchen tiles were cracked, the screen door had a tear, and something had made a nest in the rafters. She wanted to turn around and drive straight back to the motel in town, but Martin told her to relax. That was his favorite word. Relax. He used it like duct tape. Their son, Tyler, was 12. All skinny limbs and sunburned neck. The kind of kid who never looked you straight in the eye. He was obsessed with frogs, turtles, salamanders, anything slimy that squirmed. Said he was going to be a herpetologist. He had a notebook full of doodles and facts, and a green net he carried like it was part of his body. Tyler was happy the minute he saw the lake. Didn't care that the water looked like motor oil or that the reeds were thick and knotted like veins. He called it perfect. They arrived on a Sunday. Tyler spent the whole first day knee-deep at the water's edge, poking around with a stick, trying to catch something. He showed his mom a bloated toad with one eye and half a leg. She told him to put it down, that it probably had diseases. Tyler just laughed. He wasn't scared of things like that. On Monday night, around 9:30, Tyler went down to the dock with his flashlight and his net. He said he'd seen a snapping turtle earlier, a big one, and he wanted to try and catch it before bed. June told him not to stay out too long. The bugs were thick and the fog was rolling in. Martin was on his laptop trying to find a signal strong enough to check emails. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. When they noticed the silence, it was already too late. Martin went down first. The flashlight was floating near the edge of the dock, The beam pointed straight down into the water. Tyler's net was lying nearby. There was a long, wet smear across the wood planks, like something had been dragged. At first, Martin thought Tyler had fallen in and was playing some dumb prank, maybe hiding under the dock. But he wasn't there. They called for him, shouted. June came running barefoot, crying his name. The flashlight kept shining down into the black like it was trying to show them something underneath. The water didn't move. It never moved. The police came within the hour. Divers arrived by morning. They searched the lake for days. The water was too dark, too deep in places it shouldn't have been. A diver named Rick Manning said it felt wrong down there, that the bottom shifted when you touched it like the lake was breathing. They didn't find Tyler, but they found bones, not human ones. Animal bones, hundreds of them, clean, white, and hollow, snapped open like the marrow had been sucked out. They found them in piles near the bottom, tangled in the weeds, some as small as a mouse, some as big as a deer. One diver said he found a cat collar, the kind with a bell on it, wedged inside a cracked deer skull. It jingled when he moved it. He threw it back. The Gellners went home 3 days later without their son. They didn't do interviews, didn't sue the cabin owner. They just disappeared back into New Jersey, hollow-eyed and quieter than they'd ever been. The cops ruled it a drowning. No foul play suspected, the report said. Body unrecovered. But the locals knew better. They'd seen it happen before. A teenager in the 80s, a fisherman in 95. A couple of college kids in 2002, nobody ever found, just gone. Like the lake swallowed them whole. They say something lives in pickerel, something old, something that only stirs when the water warms and the frogs start singing at night. Some folks say it waits, that it sleeps most of the year, wrapped around the stones like roots, listening. And when summer comes, it feeds. People still rent the cabins. There's no warning sign, no do not swim notice. But if you ask the old-timers at the diner, they'll just shake their heads and mutter. Stay out of the water, they'll say, especially at night. And if you ever see a flashlight floating near the dock, don't go looking. Whatever's down there doesn't want to be found. It just wants you to come closer, because once it tastes you, it never forgets. Carmel, Indiana, July 1996. If you were there, you remember. The heat that year came early and stayed late, baking the pavement until it shimmered, curling the edges of newspaper left on porches too long. The lawns were green because the sprinklers never stopped, and the smell of fresh mulch and gasoline from mowers hung heavy in the air. It was a good year for mosquitoes, a bad one for dogs. 3 died from heat stroke before mid-June. And it was the last year any parent let their kids run to the ice cream truck without supervision. Back then, the neighborhood still had kids in them. You could hear them yelling and laughing 2 blocks over. Bikes left sprawled on driveways like chalk outlines. Dirty knees, Kool-Aid mouths, bruises that bloomed purple like little medals of childhood. And over it all, that sound, the warped metallic jingle of the ice cream truck, looping endlessly. Something about it made you thirsty. It showed up every afternoon between 3 and 5. Always the same truck, off-white with faded red lettering and peeling decals of Rocket Pops and fudge bars. The driver was a man no one recognized. He didn't wave, didn't smile. If you caught a glimpse of his eyes, they were too wide and too still, like glass marbles jammed into pale clay. Some kid said he never blinked, not once. His name never showed up on any vendor license. No local company claimed him. The truck had no plates, but none of that seemed to matter when you were a kid. And the heat made your skin itch. The only thing that mattered was the jingle and the cold weight of change in your hand. The rumors started with Eric Willis, age 8. Swore up and down that when he paid for a bomb pop, he saw something reach up from the freezer. Not the ice cream man's hand, but a different one. Thinner, paler, with too many knuckles. He dropped his pop and ran home crying. His parents told him he'd imagined it. Too much goosebumps, maybe. Then Jessie Morales, 10, said the man whispered, when he thought no one was listening. She was right behind him in line one day, said she heard him muttering names under his breath. Names of kids from her school, but also dates. Old ones, and something that sounded like prayers, but all the words were backward. She said the sound made her teeth hurt. The jokes started after that. Older kids dared each other to touch the truck, to look inside the little side window where the freezer was. Some swore they saw flies in there, not just one or two, but a black cloud that scattered when you knocked on the door. Nobody was laughing by August. That's when the first kid disappeared. Zach Brenner, age 9, last seen riding his bike toward the corner of Elm and Cutter. The ice cream truck had just passed through. Zach was never found. 3 days later, on the other side of town, Ellie Drake vanished from her backyard while her parents were grilling burgers. Her little sister said she'd gone out front because she heard the song. The third one was Caleb Watson, 11 years old. A quiet, slow kid with asthma and a Game Boy that never left his pocket. He vanished from the playground by the elementary school. His inhaler was found in the mulch. It still had the plastic cap on. The police questioned everyone, local drivers, anyone with a freezer truck. Nothing, no license plates, no records. They checked security tapes from gas stations and traffic cams, all grainy, all useless. But one blurry photo did show the truck turning off a side road near the outskirts of town. It was heading toward the cornfields. On August 29th, a farmer named Harold Timmons called the sheriff about a strange vehicle parked just inside the tree line behind his fields. When the cops arrived, they found the truck. It was empty. The jingle box had been torn out, wires hanging like veins. Inside, melted ice cream had pooled on the seats, thick and sticky, crawling with ants. The freezer in the back was still cold. It had its own generator. They opened it. Inside were 3 sets of teeth, not full skulls, just the teeth, arranged in a neat little circle, like a smile. Not human either, too long, too sharp, too many, but every tooth had something carved into it, tiny scratches, delicate and deliberate. When the techs examined them under light, they found names etched into the enamel: Zach, Ellie, Caleb. The Gellner report, filed later that year, classified the incident as an unsolved abduction with extreme abnormalities. That was the official language. But the families never got closure. The town tried to move on. Halloween still came. Thanksgiving, another summer. But no one ever heard that ice cream jingle again. Well, almost no one. In 2003, a kid named Robbie Mahler in a subdivision outside Gary told his mom he heard music coming from the woods behind their house. Said it sounded like ice cream music. She told him to stop making up stories. The next day, Robbie said he dreamed about a man with a wet shirt and fly-covered skin who whispered backwards prayers into his ear. He slept with the lights on for a year, so if you ever hear that jingle again on a hot summer afternoon, too slow, too warped, coming from somewhere it shouldn't, don't go looking. Don't follow it. Don't buy the bomb pop. Some things wear human skin just well enough to pass, but they don't want your money. They want your name. Camp Donner Pines was the kind of place parents picked because it was cheap and had good values. That meant crosses nailed above bunk beds, morning devotionals, and stale oatmeal that stuck to your tongue. It sat deep in the Deschutes National Forest, tucked behind a gravel road that most GPS systems don't even show anymore. Back then, in the summer of '83, they packed it with kids from Salem, Eugene, Bend, anywhere within a couple hours' drive. No one asked too many questions about the place. They just dropped their kids off and drove back to normal life. trusting that a week of Jesus songs and team-building exercises would come cheaper than therapy. The lake always smelled a little off. Not like rot exactly, more like wet copper. The counselors blamed it on mineral runoff. But the fish didn't bite there, and when they did, they came up with tumors or their eyes missing. Nobody swam in it past the first day. The forest was thick, even for Oregon. Pines so tall you could get lost looking up. At night, it swallowed the sky. On July the 14th, 1983, 12 campers sat cross-legged around the fire, picking burnt marshmallow off their fingers and trying to look braver than they felt. The air was too still. Even the bugs seemed to be holding their breath. The counselors had passed around cocoa in chipped mugs and were telling ghost stories that were already stale. Then one of the girls, Natalie Sutter, 9 years old, brown braids and a chipped front tooth, asked about Whistler Jack. The moment she said the name, the fire cracked so loud, one kid dropped his cup. Nobody laughed, not at first. Then one of the older boys said something about escaped psychos and bird calls, and the mood started to lighten. Whistler Jack was camp legend. Some said he was an inmate who escaped from an asylum back in the 50s and lived in the woods, surviving off squirrels and unlucky hikers. Others said he was never human to begin with, that he wore skin like a costume, that he could copy any sound he heard. Owls, loons, even your mother's voice calling your name from the dark. What made him stand out was the whistle. Long, hollow, sad, like a kettle screaming in the next room. The kind of sound that made your hair stand up even if you didn't know why. Right as the group was laughing it off, they heard it. A whistle, not close, just on the edge of hearing, like it had bounced off the lake and come back thinner, flatter. One of the counselors, Mark Holloway, 19 years old, working the summer before heading to college in Corvallis, stood up and looked around. Probably an owl, he said, but his voice wavered just enough to tell the truth. Then it happened again, this time closer, maybe 40 yards away, just beyond the tree line. It wasn't an owl. The third whistle came from behind the latrines. Too close, too wrong. One note, but it wobbled like it had never been made by lungs and lips. Kids screamed. One wet himself. Mark told everyone to get back to their cabins and took 2 other counselors with him to check things out. They never made it back. By morning, 3 were missing, Mark and 2 campers. One of them was Natalie. The others found the fire burned down to coals and a set of footprints that circled the pit again and again. Not barefoot, not boots. Something in between. The prints were wide, but the toes looked almost too long, too thin. Search parties combed the area for 5 straight days. They brought in dogs, helicopters, even a volunteer psychic from Salem. Nothing. Just torn branches, shredded fabric, and then on the 6th morning something was found nailed to a tree near the lake. It was a piece of Mark's camp t-shirt, the white cotton gone gray from damp and dirt. Pinned beneath it, nailed through the bark with a rusty railroad spike, was a human tongue, still wet. The camp closed that August. The cross above the main lodge was taken down. The lake was drained the following spring, but nothing helped. The land was cursed and everyone knew it. People in Bend still talk about it sometimes. Usually after a few beers, usually around a fire. They say the tongue belonged to Mark, that it was yanked out so he couldn't scream. They say Natalie's parents still get calls in the middle of the night, nothing but the sound of distant whistling, and sometimes hikers who wander too close to the old site claim to hear something in the woods, a low note that doesn't belong, just one long, lonely whistle. If you're camping nearby and the fire burns low, listen carefully, because Whistler Jack's still out there, and he remembers your name. There's a stretch of back road just outside Gainesville, Florida, where the Spanish moss hangs low and the cicadas scream like old ghosts in the trees, where the locals don't like to drive after sunset. It's not marked on any maps anymore, but if you ask the right gas station clerk, or the kind of waitress who's been pouring coffee for 30 years, they'll tell you where to find it. Just don't ask twice. Everyone around those parts called it the breather, not the house, the thing. It used to be a house once, a squat little place with flaking yellow paint and a sagging porch that looked like it'd exhale its last breath any minute. Except it never did. People swore it moved. Not like a creaky old building shifting on bad foundations, but really moved, in and out, slow and steady, like lungs under a wet blanket of kudzu vines, like something buried deep inside was still alive, just barely. That's how the legend started anyway. In the summer of 2012, 3 college students from the University of Florida decided to poke the beast. Kyle Hendricks, Serena Vale, and Tony Alvarez, film majors, ghost junkies, and regulars on some rickety YouTube channel with jump cuts and cheesy static effects. They called it Real Haunts or something dumb like that, but the 3 of them thought they were building a brand. This was their big shot. A real urban legend, a house that breathed. Who could resist? They went out there with a Canon camcorder, a busted spirit box, and enough Red Bull to reanimate a corpse. Kyle did most of the talking. Tony held the camera, and Serena, quiet, sharp-eyed Serena, took notes and kept checking her EMF meter like it meant anything. They were never seen again. Not in town, not on campus, not even at their dingy apartment off Archer Road. But 2 days after their disappearance, the groundskeeper across the way found a phone in the overgrown grass near the house. It was cracked, battery hanging on by a thread, but somehow still recording. The cops got the footage. No one talks about it officially, but you know how these things go. Copies surface, whispered rumors leak through the cracks. Someone always knows someone who saw it. And the story, it's always the same. The video starts with jokes. Kyle's making fun of the mold on the walls, calling it Black Death. Serena warns them not to step too hard because the floor's already buckling under their weight. They move through rooms like they're walking through an old lung. Everything feels damp. The wallpaper's curling like it wants to peel away and scream. They keep hearing something, faint breathing, not theirs. Something deeper, older, coming from the walls. At one point, Kyle puts his hand to the floorboards and says, "Do you feel that?" The floor's moving. Then the breathing gets louder, fast, like panic, like whatever was asleep is waking up. The camera goes wild, grainy flashes. Serena's voice, sharp, scared, shouting, "It's not just the house, it's inside the house." Then comes the sound. Not a scream from a throat, a scream from everything. From the wood, the nails, the insulation. From the walls bending like ribs. From the pipes howling like wind through a skull. A sound of splintering, of something giving birth to something else. And then nothing. Just a static hiss and the soft crackle of the phone recording dirt and weeds. The house burned down a week later. No official cause, no accelerants, no weather to blame. One firefighter, a guy named Benny Magruder, who'd been doing this job since he was old enough to hold a hose, said something he later regretted during a TV interview. Said when they pulled up to the scene, the flames were already coming out the windows like the place was breathing fire. He said it felt angry, but that wasn't the worst part. Benny said he saw footprints leading away from the wreck. Bare feet. 3 sets at first, then more. Hands, too. Tiny handprints, dozens of them, dragging through the ash, across the lawn, toward the tree line. The department shut him up real quick after that, told reporters he'd been confused by smoke inhalation. But his wife says he still wakes up screaming some nights, swears the sheets move up and down like something's breathing under the mattress. And that's why the road isn't on maps anymore. Why realtors skip that parcel of land when they're selling property in the area. Because some houses are more than haunted. Some houses are alive, and they remember the ones who fed them. Summer nights in Nebraska aren't like summer nights anywhere else. They don't end, not really. They just stretch, flat and thick and humming, like the land itself is holding its breath. The air gets syrupy and strange around 2 a.m. when the world goes silent except for the bugs clicking in the stalks and the soft moan of old diesel down Highway 83. That's when Del Carter saw her. He was hauling freight from North Platte to Kansas. Same route he'd run a dozen times. Cab of the truck smelled like stale coffee and the wrapper from a microwaved burrito. The radio had died somewhere outside Stapleton, and he didn't mind the quiet. Del liked the dark, liked the way it swallowed up the things he didn't want to think about. But then, there she was, just standing there on the shoulder, thumb out, head down, long black hair like a funeral veil. He almost didn't stop. The road was empty, the kind of empty that starts to feel personal. But something, maybe guilt, maybe boredom, made his foot ease off the gas. He coasted to a stop and leaned over, window down. "You okay?" he asked. No answer. She opened the door and climbed in like she'd done it 100 times before. She was young, maybe 20, maybe less. Her dress was pale blue, the hem stained with something dark. Mud, Del figured. The kind of mud you only got out here, where the fields soak up more than rain. She didn't speak, just sat stiff, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the window like she was watching something only she could see. Del cleared his throat. "Where you headed?" Silence. He tried again. "You local? You get stuck out here?" Nothing, but a few minutes later she turned her head, just a little, and said, soft and clear, "I need to get out before sunrise, please." Del didn't know what to make of that. He glanced at the clock. 2:37 a.m. "All right," he said. "We'll get you wherever you need." She didn't reply, just kept staring into the corn like something was waiting for her in there. He drove 10 miles before she spoke again. "Here," she said. Del looked. Just an old gravel path between two fields, barely wide enough for a tractor. No mailbox, no lights, just the moon hanging low over the corn, and that strange stillness that comes before a storm. "You sure?" he asked, turning to her. But she wasn't there. Passenger seat was empty, not just empty, cold. He slammed the brakes, heart thudding, looked around, leaned out the window. No sign of her. But there were footprints, muddy, small, pressed into the vinyl of the seat, still wet. Del stared. His hands were shaking. Then movement. Someone walking down that gravel path. Same pale dress, same long hair. Only now she moved like her bones didn't fit quite right. Slow, deliberate, like she was remembering how to walk. She disappeared into the corn without a sound. No rustling, no snapping stalks. Just the soft, choking smell of wet earth and something else. Something sour. Old. Del sat there a long time, cab idling, sweat chilling on his back. And then he heard it. A low, ragged sob. Not behind him, not in the corn, inside the cab, right behind the driver's seat. He didn't turn around, didn't breathe, didn't blink until the sun came up, and the corn turned gold in the morning light. They say he never took that route again. Sold the truck a few months later, moved to Arizona where the fields are made of dust and the only thing growing is cactus and regret. But sometimes when he talks to the night and thinks no one's listening, he still hears that sobbing, and he remembers the mud, the smell of the corn, and how some things, some people, don't hitch rides to get somewhere. They hitch rides to get out. If you made it this far, well, maybe you've got stronger nerves than most. Or maybe you're just like me, drawn to the dark like a moth to a busted porch light. Either way, I hope your summer nights feel just a little more uneasy now. Hope the sound of an ice cream truck in the distance makes you think twice. Hope the whisper of wind through cornstalks gives you pause. Hope you glance twice at the shadows near your campfire, and don't whistle back if something whistles first. If you liked these stories, give this video a like. Drop your favorite one in the comments. Tell me which one made you turn on a few extra lights. And if you want more true horror every week, hit that subscribe button. There's always more where this came from. Now go on, try to sleep, but don't trust the heat. That's when the dark things come out. The ones that move just beyond the edge of the porch light. The ones that wait for the fan to start spinning and the sweat to bead on your forehead. They don't knock, they just watch and breathe and wait. Sleep tight.